My stepdad told my coworkers I lied about my degree at my office party. I stood in the middle of the office party, a plastic cup of cheap wine in my hand, forcing a smile as my coworkers clinked glasses and laughed about some meme they'd seen on X. The conference room was decked out with string lights and a sad little buffet table, think limp sandwiches and a bowl of chips that had gone stale before the night even started. It was my first big office event since landing the junior marketing analyst job at this mid-sized firm in Chicago. And I'd been riding a high all week. 6 months in, I was finally feeling like I belonged. My boss, Karen, had even pulled me aside earlier to say my latest campaign report was impressive for someone fresh out of college. I was 27, scrappy, and proud of the degree I'd clawed my way through at a state school, even if it wasn't Ivy League. Then my stepdad, Greg, showed up. I hadn't invited him. My mom had insisted on coming to support me, and Greg tagged along like he always does, his presence a grating obligation I couldn't shake. He's a loud, barrel-chested guy in his 50s who thinks he's charming, but mostly just steamrolls conversations. Mom had been vague about coming, saying she wanted to see where her daughter works, and I'd stupidly thought it'd be fine. I figured they'd pop in, say hi, and leave before the real party started. Instead, Greg planted himself by the snack table, holding court like he owned the place, his voice booming over the music. It started innocently enough. He was telling my coworker Josh about his glory days as a car salesman, exaggerating every detail. I hovered nearby, half listening, ready to steer Mom away if Greg got too obnoxious. Then Karen walked over, all professional warmth, and introduced herself. "So, you're the proud parents," she said, glancing at me with a grin. Mom beamed, but Greg's eyes glinted with something I couldn't place, something mean. "Oh, we're proud. All right," he said, his tone too loud, too performative, especially since she's doing so well for someone who, fudged her way through that degree. The room didn't go silent, not like in the movies, but I felt it, a shift, like the air had thickened. Josh laughed, thinking it was a joke. Karen's smile faltered. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but Greg kept going, oblivious or maybe not, his words slicing through the hum of the party. "Yeah, she barely passed her classes," he said, gesturing at me with his beer. "Told everyone she graduated with honors, but between you and me, she's lucky they let her walk at all." My face burned. I could feel eyes on me. Josh, Karen, a couple of other coworkers who drifted closer. Mom stood there, frozen, her smile brittle. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true. I'd graduated with a 3.6 GPA, not honors, but solid. I'd worked nights at a diner to pay for textbooks, stayed up until 3 a.m., cramming for exams. My degree was real, earned, mine. But Greg's lie hung in the air, and I couldn't find my voice. All I could think was, why? Why would he say that? Karen cleared her throat, trying to pivot. "Well, she's doing great work here," she said, but her tone was cautious now, like she was reassessing me. Josh made some awkward joke about college being overrated, but the damage was done. I could see it in their faces, the flicker of doubt. Greg, meanwhile, just grinned, like he'd told a great story, and grabbed another handful of chips. I pulled Mom aside, my hands shaking. "Why did he say that?" I hissed. She avoided my eyes, muttering something about how Greg didn't mean it and just gets carried away. But I knew better. Greg had never liked me, not since he married Mom when I was 12. He'd always seen me as competition for her attention, a burden he had to tolerate. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The rest of the party was a blur. I smiled through gritted teeth, made small talk, and avoided Karen's gaze. But inside, I was unraveling. My coworkers were whispering. I could feel it. My reputation, the one I'd been building brick by brick, was cracking. And Greg, he just kept laughing, oblivious to the bomb he'd dropped. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. By the time I got home, I was a mess, furious, humiliated, and scared. My job was all I had, the one thing I'd built for myself. And now, because of Greg's lie, it felt like it was slipping away. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. I didn't know why he'd done it, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him ruin me. The days after the office party were a slow bleed. I dragged myself to work, my stomach knotted, hyper-aware of every glance, every hushed conversation. Josh, who used to crack jokes with me in the break room, now gave me these half-smiles, like he wasn't sure what to believe. Karen, my muzz, didn't bring up Greg's comment, but her feedback on my latest report was curt, laced with a new skepticism. "This is solid, but double-check your data next time," she said, her eyes not meeting mine. I wanted to scream that I hadn't lied, that my degree was real, but I couldn't without sounding defensive. The whispers had taken root, and I could feel my place in the office, already shaky as the new kid, slipping. At home, I was a wreck. I barely slept, my mind looping Greg's words, his smug grin. I'd always known he didn't like me, but this was different. This was sabotage. I tried talking to Mom again, hoping she'd see how much damage he'd done. We sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her face tired. "He was just joking, honey," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're taking it too personally." I stared at her, my chest tight. She wasn't just defending him, she was choosing him. Again. I left her house feeling more alone than ever, the betrayal cutting deeper than Greg's lie. Work became a minefield. I second-guessed every email, every meeting, paranoid that my coworkers were dissecting me behind my back. During a team brainstorm, I pitched an idea for a new ad campaign, something I'd spent hours researching. Halfway through, Sarah, a senior analyst who'd always been friendly, cut me off. "Let's stick to proven strategies," she said, her tone clipped. The room moved on, but I felt the sting. Were they dismissing me because of Greg's lie, or was I just imagining it? The doubt was eating me alive. Socially, things got worse. The office had a tight-knit vibe, happy hours, group chats, inside jokes. I'd been on the edge of that circle, slowly working my way in. Now, I was an outsider again. Invites to drinks dried up. The group chat went quiet when I joined. At lunch, I overheard Josh and another coworker talking about trust issues in the team, their eyes flicking toward me. I pretended not to notice, but my hands shook as I picked up my salad. I wasn't just fighting Greg's lie, I was fighting the version of me he'd planted in their heads. The worst part was how it messed with my head. I'd always been scrappy. The kid who worked harder than everyone else to prove I deserved my spot. But now, I felt like an imposter. I'd stare at my diploma, framed on my apartment wall, and wonder if I really was a fraud. Maybe I hadn't earned it. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The thoughts were irrational, but they clung to me, heavy and relentless. I stopped posting on X, stopped texting friends. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, weak, unraveling. One night, alone in my apartment, I hit a breaking point. I was scrolling through job listings, half convinced I'd have to start over somewhere else. When something snapped, I wasn't the liar. Greg was. He'd done this to me, and I wasn't going to let him win. I didn't know how, but I needed to fight back, not just for my job, but for myself. I needed to know why he'd lied, what he gained from tearing me down, and I needed to prove to everyone, Karen, Josh, even myself, that I was exactly who I said I was. The decision to fight back lit a fire in me, but I wasn't sure where to start. I couldn't just confront Greg. He'd deny everything, and Mom would back him up. I needed proof, something concrete to show my coworkers I wasn't the liar he'd painted me as. More than that, I needed to understand why he'd targeted me. This wasn't just a random jab, it felt personal, calculated. I started digging, piecing together a plan while trying to keep my head above water at work. First, I tackled the degree issue. I logged into my university's alumni portal and downloaded my official transcript, complete with the school's seal and my 3.6 GPA. I also requested a verification letter from the registrar's office, which would confirm my graduation in writing, It felt excessive, but I wasn't taking chances. If Karen or HR started asking questions, I'd have documents ready. I emailed the transcript to myself, labeled it backup, and saved it on a USB drive for good measure. It was a small step, but it grounded me, reminded me my degree was real. Next, I turned to Greg. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew he wasn't the type to slip up in a heart-to-heart. I started with what I had, his behavior. That glint in his eye at the party, the way he doubled down on the lie. It wasn't just him being a loudmouth. I thought back to other moments, times he'd undermined me in front of Mom or made snide comments about my fancy job. There was a pattern, and I needed to figure out what drove it. I called my older cousin, Lisa, who'd known Greg since he married Mom. Over coffee at a diner near my apartment, I spilled everything. Lisa listened, her face tightening as I described the party. "He's always been jealous of you," she said, stirring her latte. "You're everything he's not. Young, driven, educated. He can't stand it." She paused, then added, "You know he's been telling people you're ungrateful for years, right? Like you owe him for being in your life." That hit hard. I hadn't realized Greg was spinning stories about me outside the family. Lisa suggested I check his social media, see if he'd posted anything that could give me a clue. I wasn't big on X, but Greg was. His profile was public, full of car sales brags and bad political takes. I scrolled through his posts, feeling like a creep but desperate for answers. Most of it was noise, memes, rants about kids these days. Then I found a post from a week before the party, a vague jab about people who fake their way to the top. It had a few likes from his buddies, one commenting, "Tell me about it." Was it about me? I couldn't be sure, but it felt too pointed to ignore. I screenshot it, my hands shaky. Back at work, I kept my head down but started observing. I noticed Karen checking my reports more closely, her red pen circling minor errors she'd have overlooked before. During a meeting, Josh asked if I'd double-checked my data, echoing Karen's skepticism. It wasn't blatant, but the distrust was there, simmering. I wanted to show them my transcript, clear my name, but I held off. Dumping proof on them now would look desperate, like I had something to hide. I needed to be strategic. Then I got a break. My coworker, Priya, who'd been quiet but kind since I started, pulled me aside after a team lunch. "I heard what happened at the party," she said, her voice low. "I don't believe it. You're too good at your job to be faking anything." Her words were a lifeline. I thanked her, my throat tight, and asked if she'd heard anyone else talking. She hesitated, then said, "Josh and Sarah were wondering if HR was going to look into it." They didn't say more, but be careful. My heart sank. HR, if they started digging, even a rumor could tank my career. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the screenshot of Greg's post and my transcript. Priya's warning had upped the stakes. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. It was about my future. I needed to know what Greg was playing at, and I needed to shut it down before it went further. I started searching his name online, looking for anything, old jobs, public records, even his ex-followers. I didn't know what I'd find, but I was done waiting for answers to fall in my lap. My search for answers about Greg turned into an obsession. Late nights, hunched over my laptop, I scoured public records, old LinkedIn profiles, even obscure forums where car salesmen swapped stories. I found scraps. His old dealership had mediocre reviews. He'd bounced between jobs before marrying Mom, but nothing explained why he'd gone after me so viciously. Then, buried in a county records database, I hit something. A dismissed fraud charge from 15 years ago, tied to falsified sales contracts. It was dropped, no conviction, but it painted a picture. Greg had a history of bending the truth, and maybe he saw my success as a mirror to his failures. The real breakthrough came through X. I'd been monitoring Greg's posts, and one night he replied to a thread about overrated college degrees. His comment, "Some people fake their way through and still get ahead," not saying names, but you know who. It was posted 2 days after the party, and the timing felt like a gut punch. I cross-referenced his followers and found a mutual connection, a guy named Mike, who turned out to be a distant cousin of Sarah, my coworker. Mike had liked the post. My mind raced. Had Greg's lie spread beyond the party? Was Sarah's skepticism fed by family gossip? I screenshot the comment, my hands trembling. This wasn't just personal. Greg was actively poisoning my world. Armed with evidence, I faced a choice. I could take my transcript and verification letter to Karen, clear my name, and hope HR wasn't already sniffing around. But that wouldn't touch Greg. He'd walk away unscathed, probably laughing. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I dug deeper into his ex activity, finding more vague posts about liars and undeserving kids. Each one fueled my anger, but also my clarity. Greg wasn't just jealous, he was projecting. His fraud charge, his shaky career, his need to tear me down, it all clicked. He couldn't stand me succeeding where he'd stumbled. I decided to confront him, but not alone. I asked Lisa to come with me to Mom's house, knowing I'd need backup. We sat in their living room, Greg sprawled on the couch, Mom fidgeting nearby. I laid it all out. The party, his ex posts, the fraud charge. I showed him the screenshots, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "Why did you lie about my degree?" I demanded. Greg's face reddened, but he scoffed. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was a joke." Mom nodded, desperate to keep the peace, but Lisa cut in. "It's not a joke when her job's on the line. Greg, you knew what you were doing." He doubled down, claiming I was too sensitive. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, guilt, or maybe fear. I pressed harder, mentioning his fraud charge. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he was speechless. Then he exploded, yelling about ungrateful brats and how he'd done everything for our family. Mom started crying, begging us to stop, but I didn't back down. I told him I'd already sent my transcript to Karen, that his lie hadn't stuck. It was a bluff. I hadn't sent it yet, but it hit. Greg stormed out, muttering curses. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like a win. Mom was a mess, torn between us. Lisa hugged me, saying I'd done the right thing, but I wasn't sure. Work was still a minefield. Karen hadn't mentioned HR, but the whispers hadn't stopped. I could show my transcript, rebuild my reputation, but Greg's poison had spread too far for a clean fix. I needed to decide how to close this chapter. I wasn't done with Greg. Clearing my name at work wasn't enough. He needed to face consequences. I compiled every damning piece of evidence, his ex posts, the fraud charge, screenshots of his comments. I crafted an anonymous post on X, tagging his dealership and laying out his history of lies, linking it to his profile. I didn't name myself, but I made it clear he'd slandered someone to sabotage their career. The post gained traction, his buddies piling on with their own gripes about him. By the next week, his dealership's reviews tanked, and I heard through Lisa that Greg was on leave. At work, I quietly showed Priya my transcript, who shared it with Sarah. The whispers faded, Karen's feedback softened. It wasn't perfect, but I'd fought back. Greg's lie had cost me, but I made sure it cost him more.